Stay tuned for Revolutions Per Minute coming up. And, of course, Revolutions Per Minute is hosted and produced by the members of the New York City chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. And that's coming up right about now. Stay tuned.
Revolutions Per Minute is a weekly radio show from the New York City chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America, recorded live at WBAI 99.5 in Brooklyn every Tuesday at 5. RPM is about doing the work to build a democratic socialist future. Every week, hear the latest news, analysis, and organizing experience from the minds and hearts of activists fighting every day in NYC. Join the movement at socialists.nyc.
Yo, what's good, New York? This is Jack Devine, he, him pronouns, and you are listening to Revolutions Per Minute, live from my apartment and broadcasting out from the new WBAI studios. Shout out to Reggie and everyone else in operations for keeping WBAI on the air in these dark times. RPM is a socialist radio show and podcast for members of the New York City Democratic Socialists of America. The DSA is the largest socialist organization in the United States, with 56,000 members nationwide, and NYC DSA is its biggest chapter. We are run by our 5,500 plus members and organizers who are working together to build democratic socialism in all 5 boroughs. Capitalism is plunging into a catastrophic crisis as COVID-19 exposes the anarchy of international commodity production. Businesses and schools have shut down all across the world, while states attempt to contain the virus, resulting in an unprecedented surge in unemployment. Trump and his Republican Party, the American death cult of private property, have now proposed to offer up millions of human sacrifices to their free market deity in a self-destructive effort to restart the economy. So deluded by their wealth and religious commitment to neoliberal principles, they fail to see that capital is dependent on a healthy labor force and reject any alternative to our decomposing order. Their barbaric plans would not only lead to millions of deaths, but deepen the socioeconomic crisis that lays ahead. However, the workers of the world are organizing and fighting back. DSA member Hazley Hazard, who organized a coffee shop in Williamsburg, joins us to discuss DSA's COVID Labor Response Committee. Then we're joined by DSA member Jonathan Bailey of Amazonian United, who helped lead a walkout at an Amazon warehouse last week where a worker had tested positive for COVID-19. Then we'll hear a pre-recorded interview from Amy Wilson, who spoke with Jacob Clary and Dr. Bruce Trigg of the NYC DSA Medics on the role of harm reduction in socialist organizing. But first, the headlines with Simone Norman.
Governor Cuomo has announced a stay-at-home order, which went into effect Sunday at 8 p.m. The order includes a requirement for those over 70 years old to remain at home and wear a mask while around others, a ban on all non-essential gatherings, a rule that New Yorkers should remain home except for essential trips like to get food or medicine, a mandate for New Yorkers to remain 6 feet from other people while outside of their apartment, and an order for all employees at non-essential establishments to begin working from home. Essential businesses include most healthcare facilities, utilities, and infrastructure entities such as telecommunications, transit, and hotels, essential manufacturing such as food processing, pharmaceuticals, and sanitary products, essential retail such as grocery stores, pharmacies, and liquor stores, and service providers for vulnerable populations, among others. Governor Cuomo has suspended mortgage payments for homeowners facing financial hardship, but has not announced a similar order for renters, who make up nearly half the state's households. State Senator Michael Gianaris from District 12 is working on a bill to provide similar relief for renters. With confirmed cases of coronavirus continuing to rise on Rikers Island, pressure is mounting on the city to further reduce its incarcerated population. On Friday, New York City released 56 incarcerated people from Rikers Island to help stem the spread of the virus within the jail. The inmates released were all parole violators and people jailed while awaiting trial. The state's Medicaid redesign team, which was appointed by Governor Andrew Cuomo to evaluate ways to reduce Medicaid spending, has backed a plan that would slash Medicaid spending to New York's hospitals by almost $400 million. The State Department of Labor has reported an unprecedented surge in unemployment claims, which are rising by almost 1,000% in some regions. Despite the eviction moratorium that Governor Andrew Cuomo announced last week, a loophole allows for new eviction cases to be filed. Cuomo's order suspended all current eviction cases but did not prevent landlords from filing new ones. For now, all new cases will be suspended for 45 days, but tenants may not be aware of this and show up to court anyway. Due to anticipated ridership loss during the coronavirus pandemic, the MTA is seeking a $4 billion federal bailout. Due to one of Governor Cuomo's executive orders, localities in New York may be limited in their ability to implement their own quarantine orders, such as shelter in place. New York has lost at least 20,000 hospital beds over the last 2 decades due to budget cuts and insurance overhauls. While New York City schools are closed, the city is implementing a grab-and-go meal program. Meals are available every weekday from 7:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. to any child under 18, no matter what school they actually attend, be it charter, private, or public. The program will initially be available at every school before switching to centralized hubs. The director of New York City's Independent Budget Office has said that the economic damage to the city from coronavirus could be worse than the effects of either 9/11 or the 2008 financial crisis. And in election news, Mayor Bill de Blasio has canceled the special election for Queensborough president. The city has not announced another date. And Councilmember Richie Torres from District 15 has tested positive for coronavirus.
Our headlines are brought to you by The Thorn, an incredible weekly newsletter by NYC DSA Electoral Working Group, covering local politics and radical activism. Subscribe at thethorn.nyc. So we are now joined by Halsey Hazard, a member of a DSA labor branch and involved in service industry organizing. Halsey, can you hear me?
I can. Hi. Thank
you so much for joining us. So can you explain to our listeners, maybe just briefly go over your history as a workplace organizer? And then can you describe DSA's COVID Labor Response Committee? Like, how can workers fight for safety standards and financial protections during this crisis?
Sure. First, I want to say I am also a former WAI producer on Joy of Resistance Multicultural Feminist Radio, so it's good to be back. Thank you for having me. So currently I'm working as a barista. I'm a recent graduate of NYU YDSA, and I'm a grad student in labor studies at CUNY. But in the past 2 weeks, I've had my first real hands-on labor organizing experience at the cafe that I work at. So I can just sort of briefly talk about what we did. So I, for the past couple of years, have been working at a small bakery cafe in Williamsburg and Greenpoint called Bakery. And in the past 2 weeks, my coworkers and I have gotten together to use our social distancing time to digitally organize our bosses to make sure that they're taking precautions to protect everyone, both regarding physical health and also financial security during this crisis. And I also wrote about this in Jacobin, which you can read more in depth if you want to know what we did. You can find that at tinyurl.com/JacobinBakery. But basically, we put together a petition asking Bakery to close and to, in the case of a closure, have a plan to make sure that everybody would be provided for. While this was going on, myself and 4 other coworkers had called in sick with possible COVID symptoms. And more people had also called in sick. So basically, the combination of our petition and us sort of somewhat organizedly sticking out had caused them to close for 2 days. So we got that, and we got some guarantees that they would provide for people, but they told us that they wanted to stay open because a lot of people need to work to make money, obviously, and that's the problem that we're facing. That's the problem that workers everywhere are facing. But in our case, it was especially important because there were a lot of people who weren't eligible for government benefits, so they were trying to keep open to make sure that those people could still be getting paid. But now Bakri has been forced to close, and I think businesses everywhere are sort of in the same position where people are, businesses are closing, people are being laid off. So sort of after some back and forth with management, we got to a place where we were unable to guarantee PTO for everybody who had called in sick unless they were actually showing symptoms, but we did get better protections on our job while the business was still open, and now that it's closed, we have all been laid off with the promise that we'll be able to come back. And we're working with management as well as on our own to fundraise for people who are ineligible for unemployment. So that's sort of where we're at, and we've put together a list of resources and other fundraisers to donate to, as well as our fundraiser on Twitter and Instagram at Bakri Workers, and you can find that there. But we also know that this problem is a lot bigger than us, right? And that's sort of why I've gotten involved in this DSA labor response to COVID, where we put together a form which you can find on the Bakri Workers Twitter, but the URL is tinyurl.com/COVID organizing. And that form is basically for workers at any business, whether it's deemed essential or deemed unessential, that they can fill out that form and let us know what's going on, what you need help with, and an organizer will get in touch and help, figure out what to do and how to move forward and make sure that you and your coworkers are safe. So we've had several hundred responses so far, which is really exciting. But we have a lot more to reach out to. We've reached out to hundreds already, and we've had some successes. But there's a lot to work through, and we're anticipating a big bump as this goes on, and more people are facing, workplace closures, layoffs, being denied PTO, not having proper protections at work. And this is happening in all industries. But especially in the service industry, which, COVID has just exacerbated problems that already exist, such as like low wages, no benefits, all that. So people all over are really feeling this, and we want to make sure that we have this network of organizers to reach out to people and to help them organize at their workplaces. Because right now, in the midst of this crisis, every shop is a hot shop and is ripe for, workers to come together and make demands and to, in our case and in many other cases, to win protections. So if that's you, if you're a worker and you're still being forced to come into work, or if you have uncertainty about, your financial security or your physical security, you can fill out this form. It's again, tinyurl.com/COVID organizing. And we'll get in touch with you. Also, if you're listening to this and you are a labor organizer or have some workplace organizing experience, we need more people to help make those calls because we have hundreds now and there might be thousands down the road. So if you want to help, you can get involved with DSA's COVID labor rapid response team. It would be great if you could, DM me on Twitter. I'm at NotHalseyUs. That's HALSEY. And I can get you in touch with that work as well. And again, we have more resources at Bakri Workers for, service workers, people that are being really affected by this. That's organizing resources, that's this form again. And that's also other funds that you can donate to or apply to if you're in need of funds, as well as other information and other petitions to sign to ensure that we get not only the response at our workplaces, but also the response from the government that we need. And that's really going to take widespread organizing to make that happen.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely clear. It's very obvious that the Trump administration and the Democrats as well, in a maybe less openly barbaric way, will not design a recovery that is going to benefit workers unless workers are collectively organizing and making demands. So I want to just thank you so much, Halsey, for joining us here on Revolutions Per Minute and sharing with our listeners how they can get involved in this service worker labor organizing. project. And we will keep our listeners updated on this as the situation progresses with both COVID-19, what looks potentially to be an impending depression even, and the worker organizing that goes along with that. So we are about to be joined by another organizer, and not in the service sector, but at Amazon, the largest corporation in this country. But before, as we wait to connect with Jonathan, I think it's really, really crucial in this time to recognize the lies that are coming out of the White House and out of right-wing media about this notion that we can have an economy, we can restart the economy without public health, with letting millions of people die. In of itself, that is obviously just horrific and a barbaric perspective. The idea that we should sacrifice people for capital accumulation, but it's also just the reality that it is impossible to have a functioning economy while you have the hospital system overflowing, particularly in a country like the United States, where the healthcare sector is 18% of the gross domestic product. This isn't something that is separate from the economy. It is its foundational basis. So we're going to hear from Jonathan, and as soon as we connect with him, Reggie, have you been able to reach out to him? Oh, we've got Jonathan is ready. Hey, Jonathan, can you hear me? Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, amazing. So, Jonathan, can you tell us about what is Amazonians United? What are your demands, and how did the incident last week where the bosses at Amazon put the warehouse workers at risk after a worker tested positive for COVID-19 demonstrate the importance of workers organizing?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a lot.
Sorry, I know our time is brief here, so you can answer that question in the best way that you can.
Well, okay. So first of all, Amazonians United is, we're just, workers at Amazon who've decided that we want to create change in our workplace.
Jonathan, could you speak into the phone, please?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sorry. Yeah, Amazonians United is just a collection of Amazon workers who've decided that they would like to push to change the conditions that we work in a bit. So for us at Amazonians United in New York, we're a few of us just who work in one of the warehouses started discussing things that we could be doing to change our conditions, and we kind of looked around to see what other people were doing, and we saw that there were other Amazon workers out there who were fighting for better conditions, and we feeling inspired by that, we thought, okay, maybe we'll call ourselves this too. And so we started our first petition a couple months back. We just started trying to see what all of us were feeling and what our frustrations were, and figuring out a way where we could be pushing for changes collectively.
You all identified kind of the conditions within your workplace that the bosses were pushing you harder and harder, and that you saw this kind of movement growing around the world where Amazon workers are organizing and fighting back. So you've taken it to your local conditions and are attempting to build power. So just to follow back on what happened last week, like what went down with the positive test, and what happened afterwards? How did the organized workers there react? And then in the long term, how can our listeners provide support to your struggle?
Yeah. So everything kind of went. So the important thing was that, for our warehouse, we knew what was going on because we had the relationships to know what was going on. Our warehouse has enough friendships in it that the information could travel quickly. Actually, somebody once sent. We saw how Amazon actually had in a video that managers should watch out for people being friends because that's bad for Amazon, which was kind of interesting and funny because that's really what led to us being able to know that there was a case of coronavirus in our warehouse. And it's only because of that we were able to contact as many people as we could, let them know what was going on, and show up to the warehouse to let anybody who didn't know. So really that as soon as we found out, that's what we were doing. We were trying to connect to as many people to let them know what was happening. Me and one of my coworkers, we went to the warehouse before, and Ira, he went, and you can actually see in the video, went into the warehouse and let everybody know what was going on. I posted up outside to make sure that nobody, no other coworkers went inside. And we ended up gathering everybody outside. He told them what was going on, brought everybody outside. And that's when you see the confrontation with management that is in the video. And it was very interesting for us because management, from the moment that we were able to take control of the situation to keep everybody safe, management pretended as if everything that was going on was because of them, right? So you can see in the video they try to say that they shut the warehouse down, but literally in the video you can hear them calling all of everybody at the warehouse, and as that call comes out, you can hear Iris, yell out, what time is it, and you can see a lot of frustration in all of our coworkers. So that was a really interesting thing, and that's part of the story that's not really getting out there. So I'm really glad that y'all have asked me to come on so that we could communicate that. Basically, Amazon's going to try to they're going to try to mislead everyone to convince all of us that we have no ability to change any of our conditions, and they're willing to say whatever they need in order to say that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really impressive showing of worker power. I would recommend any of our listeners to check out the video. You can find it online. It's been written about in a number of publications as well. And we have to move on to our next segment in a minute or so. But Jonathan, is there anything you want to tell our listeners about how they can support your struggle in the weeks to come?
Yeah. So, first of all, if you're a worker at Amazon, reach out to us. We can help you so that you can be doing the same thing. It's really only through being able to it's only through being networked enough inside your workplace that you're able to push back to keep you and your coworkers safe and your communities. It's important to recognize that though we got our warehouse shut down that night, there was another case that night as well at a Whole Foods here in New York, and they didn't shut down. But that's again because they didn't have the ability to. The workers weren't, there wasn't enough social cohesion inside the workplace for the workers to be able to take steps to keep them, their coworkers, and their community safe.
Well, I think that really highlights the distinction between a solid base of worker organization built through relationships and the need to expand that to workplaces all across the country and the world. So I just want to thank you again so much for joining us, Jonathan. We will keep our listeners updated on the struggle at Amazon here in New York and all across the world. And I just want to remind our listeners that you are tuning in to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City, broadcasting at 99.5 FM and streaming on your favorite podcast app. Connect with us after the show. You can email us at revolutionsnyc@gmail.com, or you can find us on our website, revolutionsperminute.simplecast.com, or on Twitter at NYCRPM. Today, we're talking about the various ways that workers are responding to the coronavirus and the impending economic recession, or what's looking like to be a depression. And now we're going to move in to Amy Wilson's pre-recorded interview with Jacob Clary and Dr. Bruce Trigg of the NYC DSA Medics. This is a very exciting interview on the kind of the means and the ways that the role that harm reduction plays in socialist organizing. So we're going to roll that long clip for you, and I'll be back after that's wrapped up.
What's up, New York City? This is Amy Wilson for Revolutions Per Minute. Today, I'm talking to two comrades who are active in harm reduction work here in New York City. Today, we'll talk about harm reduction as an anti-capitalist practice and what we can do to best support people who use drugs and their peers during this time of pandemic. So with me today, I have Dr. Bruce Trigg and Jacob Clary. Hello, welcome.
Hi, Amy.
Pleasure to be here.
And how are you both doing today?
Cooped up in my apartment like everybody else.
Yeah, just about the same. Gonna start going on the roof in a minute, I think.
Yes, it's so essential to get that fresh air. So before we dive into our larger conversation, if you wouldn't mind, please let me know who you are and what brought you to the work that you're doing now.
Bruce, you go ahead.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Queens, and in 1968, I was an activist with the New York High School Student Union, and very much influenced as I was growing up by WBAI, listening to the radio.
Oh, wonderful.
Learning about the world beyond Bayside, Queens. I went to City College of New York, never paid a dime tuition, went to medical school, and paid back a federal scholarship with the Indian Health Service of the U.S. Public Health Service in New Mexico and Arizona, and wound up living for 35 years in New Mexico, where I was with the New Mexico Department of Health, which was one of the first states to have a statewide harm reduction program starting in 1999. So I was very much involved in that, and eventually got into the setting up a methadone program at a jail in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and started using buprenorphine, or commonly called Suboxone, pretty early on in about 2005. So I've moved back to New York 3 years ago, and I'm currently doing consulting work in New York City and state and nationally on opiate addiction treatment and harm reduction. And I'm a member of the Lower Manhattan DSA and working hard to get Bernie elected.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for joining us and sharing your expertise today. And Jacob, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
So I'm a harm reductionist. I'm the program director of the New York City DSA opioid overdose prevention program, and a student of epidemiology at the CUNY School of Public Health. I've been doing harm reduction for maybe 2 or 3 years now. I grew up in New Hampshire, which was hit really hard by the overdose crisis. And a couple of years ago, I was looking for local work that I could be doing to prevent overdoses. I had witnessed a couple of overdoses and not had naloxone, and I found it very difficult to get some. And so I was inspired actually by the Brake Light Clinic that I think they started doing in New Orleans and then moved to East Bay, or maybe it's the other way around. Looking at like an intervention that was very low barrier and whose purpose was like very explicitly to give people like a little bit of space from the possibility of an interaction with the police. So it turned out to be actually really easy. The New York Department of Health is progressive, at least in this way. It was pretty easy to just register with them. They send me as much naloxone as I can give out to people, as long as I am tied to an organization with a medical director. So Bruce is our medical director, and DSA is the organization. And we've given out, you can't see the stack, it's next to me, at least, I don't know, several thousand doses of naloxone, and have, it's underreported. Overdose responses are typically underreported. I think we've reported maybe 20 or 30 in the past year, or the past couple of years. So, and we'll be giving out plenty more as this moves forward.
Wonderful. Well, I think this is a program within New York City DSA that many people are not aware exists. So I'm very grateful to you both for being on. And we had planned a full show around this topic, but with everything that's going on, we've got this sort of condensed version. So I certainly hope that I consider this conversation only an introduction, and I hope that both of you will be back at WBAI in the physical studios soon enough, so we can do a full show.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I expect that we'll get into this later on in this conversation, but we're always looking for volunteers.
Great. Yes, we will. We will here on Revolutions Per Minute. Great. So let's dig a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry, Bruce. Go for it.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say that, this COVID fiasco has made it clear finally to everyone in the United States and really worldwide what a broken healthcare system we have, how untogether it is, how cruel it is, how market driven it is. But people who've worked with people who use drugs have been aware of this for a long time, because the epidemic started of overdose deaths in 1999. And since then, about 450,000 people have died. So there has been another horrifying epidemic that's been going on, but has not gotten the attention of the COVID for many, many reasons. But certainly not the least is the stigma and the way people who use drugs are treated in our society. But it's marvelous that naloxone is being widely distributed now. But we've had many years that we missed, that we could have had made it much more accessible.
Absolutely. And you sort of started to get into this a little bit, but I'd love to ask the question more formally. What is this work? What is harm reduction? Could you give a brief introduction to the concept for those who may not have encountered it in the past?
Why don't you start, Jacob?
So harm reduction is it's a trauma-informed. So the way that I view it is as an extension of public health. It's trauma-informed, patient-centered. It aims to reach people and their communities impacted by drug use. I mean, when we talk about drug use harm reduction, this is the community that we're reaching towards, but obviously harm reduction can be done in any aspect of healthcare. So it's both an intervention in the continuity of care, which extends from kind of no care to fully integrated long-term health management. But it's also a method of patient care in itself. So the kind of beginning, like the inchoate harm reduction, the first kind of principle is any positive change. So the goal is to approach every problem in alignment with people's lives and circumstances. But kind of more broadly, you can see it as like a liberatory movement, which kind of so the purpose, or at least my goal anyway, is to return public health, use harm reduction to return public health to its kind of 19th century roots in what we call social medicine, what I call like structural epidemiology. So this guy, can I do a quote? Is this cool?
Yeah, go for it.
So interesting, like scholar of medicine, Luc Massac, he talks about returning epidemiology to its mid-19th century roots in social medicine and to focus on the pathological health effects of both the material, political, economic infrastructure and the symbolic contours of social inequality. So I've always found harm reduction to be like part of that liberatory structure. And so my goal is to kind of like further remove it from whatever kind of mainstream depoliticized kind of structures that it necessarily exists in.
I like to think of harm reduction as the intersection between public health and human rights. And basically, people who use drugs, society has often looked at it as a dichotomy that either you're going to be abstinent or you're going to have totally out of control use of drugs. And harm reduction deals with everything in between, because there is a huge in between. People use drugs occasionally. Some people control their drug use. Some people do, in fact, have very problematic drug use, and we have interventions to offer people whatever stage their drug use is. And there's no requirement that they promise to become abstinent. That may not be possible for some people, and it may not be what people themselves want. So basically, we're saying that we can decrease the harm to you and to your family and community, no matter how you use drugs. We're willing to work with you. And the other thing is, it's really a mutual aid approach.
Right.
It's the ultimate mutual aid, because it started out being done by drug users and their communities to support and help people out. It was completely illegal when it started in Europe, and it was illegal when it started in the United States.
I want to give just like some really brief but concrete examples of what harm reduction is. So like a syringe exchange, right? So this example that Bruce is talking about, like decreasing the harms of drug use. So if people are sharing syringes, then they're, we're all a little bit more expert in how pathogens are transmitted now. But so bloodborne pathogens are really easily transmitted. The syringe is kind of like a perfect implement for doing that. So instead of and people who use drugs know about this, but often the impulse to use is stronger than the impulse to than like anyone's like possible ability to find a sterile syringe. So a really great example of harm reduction is just giving people sterile syringes, like really easy, really cheap, and reduces the risk of bloodborne pathogen transmission. Now, like a maybe more controversial for some people example would be a safe supply of morphine or heroin or anything like that, because there's a way to we talk about the overdose epidemic, but there's a way to talk about this as, instead of an overdose epidemic, actually like a poisoning epidemic, like fentanyl, but also increasingly I'm hearing from harm reductionists in Canada, benzodiazepine and all kinds of other drugs are making it into what people think of as the heroin supply. So like a really great way to reduce overdose deaths is for people in chaotic use who are not ready to stop using, to get them a safe supply of a drug with like, just a normal therapeutic dose.
Right.
So in Canada and 8 or 9 European countries, they offer heroin-assisted maintenance but for people, not for everyone, for people who are not successful or aren't doing well on methadone or Suboxone. So that's the other thing. Part of harm reduction is to recognize that there is a medical model that we can use to treat people as if because it is a chronic disease.
Right.
Once you have, we're trying to get away from the term addiction. The technical term now is substance use disorder or opioid use disorder. So people with opioid use disorder must be offered, it's extremely important, they must be offered medicines that have been proven to work and are used all over the world. And those two are methadone and what's commonly called Suboxone. That's the street, it's a brand name, but that's what people call it. It's actually buprenorphine plus naloxone. Mm-hmm. So those two treatments are extremely effective. And part of our frustration is that it's been incredibly difficult to expand access to buprenorphine and methadone in a timely, appropriate way for people in the United States. And the amazing thing is that just in the last week, the federal government, for the first time in 50 years, has changed the methadone regs temporarily to allow people to get 30 days of take home if they're stable, and if they are less stable but felt to be able to handle the take homes, people can now get 14 days. And it's taken 50 years for this to happen. And the painful reality is that this should have been done much earlier during the opioid epidemic, and many lives would have been saved.
Now, do you think that those FDA regulations were in direct response to the pandemic, or do you think that those were unrelated? These emergency changes were made by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. See, methadone it's a long, complicated story. It's been around for more than 50 years, but the regulations make it very difficult to use because it can only be dispensed at specialized treatment programs. They're called OTPs, opioid treatment programs, but the rules are very rigid, and many people wind up having to go every day or 5-6 days a week to a methadone clinic for years and decades. And this has been one of the reasons that people who use drugs who would benefit have been reluctant to sign up for methadone. And now, for the first time ever, they've changed the rules because of the COVID epidemic, which is, again, a wonderful thing. On the other hand, why did they wait after 450,000 people died of opioid overdoses? The other thing, by the way, is they've also loosened the rules for buprenorphine prescribing. So I can actually start someone on a telephone call on this treatment that in the past would have required face-to-face contact in a medical setting. Right. Well, that seems like a positive change.
Extremely positive. No, extremely positive.
If brought about by something that we would never prefer to have happen. So, folks, you're listening to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in NYC, broadcasting at 99.5 FM and streaming on your favorite podcast app. To connect with us after the show, you can email us at revolutionsnyc@gmail.com. You can find us on our website, revolutionsperminute.simplecast.com, or on Twitter at NYCRPM. And today, for this segment of our show, we're talking about organizing for harm reduction under capitalism. So I have Dr. Bruce Trigg and Jacob Clary of NYC DSA's opioid overdose prevention program to tell us about their work. So we are coming to the end of our time for this segment. So let's talk about how those who are listening can get involved and what's going on in terms of your organizing under the new social isolation public health restrictions that we're under.
So I expect we can kind of give you a link or an email address or a phone number that you can put on the webpage when you distribute this, or should I say it out loud now?
You can say it out loud, yeah, and then we'll put it in.
Yeah, so anyone can email nycdsahr@gmail.com to get involved in this. I've also got a Google Voice number. Let me pull it up. I'm sorry. Sorry, 1 second.
It's nycdsahr@gmail.com, right? For harm reduction? Okay.
Yeah. And then the Google Voice number is 908-543-4986. And so that's for anybody who needs harm reduction supplies or anybody who wants to get involved. So to answer the second part of your question, what we have been doing, honestly, not much yet. I'm starting to organize and talk to people about how we can distribute harm reduction supplies safely and at a distance. But I've been sick for a week or so I've had to stay completely isolated. Just me and my partner and my cat, which hasn't been bad. My symptoms are really mild. I mean, so it could be a lot worse, but I haven't been able to get out of the house or start doing any kind of distributions. But as this gets worse, and it certainly will, the exponential increase in New York alone is it's a much steeper slope than exists kind of anywhere else, certainly Italy, and we're seeing how bad Italy has been. So we've got time to solidify. We've got a little time to solidify our networks, but this will continue to increase, and this is almost kind of the new normal. There's plenty of work to continue doing.
I just want to point out that Jacob and his partner have not been able to get tested, and of course, if they lived in a country with a national health program, single payer, like the rest of the world, they would have been tested. So they know for sure what they're dealing with. But I'm glad that he's feeling better. Another urgent matter for people in the harm reduction world is we have to get the elderly and people at risk out of the jails and prisons in the United States as rapidly as possible, because it will turn the often piddle shit charges they're in for into a death sentence.
Well, I want to point out also, though, those sentences that those people, those, nonviolent charges that they're so often in for are drug charges. So when we talk about harm reduction has to be intimately connected with the decarceration movement and fighting against the drug war, both at home thing, but also talking about the expanded reach of international relations and deposing leftist leaders in Central and South America because they're not being as strict about growing, coca and poppy as we demand they be. So ending criminalization of drug use in all its forms has to be a part of the harm reduction movement.
Absolutely.
Something that I talk about in my trainings is, so I talk about naloxone as like an emergency intervention. And so all of my trainings, I'm just giving people naloxone, teaching them how to use it and how to respond to an overdose. But at the end, I always make a point to say, look, this is an emergency intervention. But if all we have is emergency interventions, like if you have this image of like a pyramid, and emergency interventions are at the top, along with things like epinephrine or wound care or splinting or any kind of pre-hospital care. If all you have is the tip of that pyramid, and you don't have the center or the base, which would be things that we don't talk about as things that public health should be involved in, things like housing and democratic enfranchisement. If you don't have that, then all you're doing is this incredibly morbid game of whack-a-mole, where you're just attacking one overdose and then going to another, and then but you're not able to get at the entire structure that's causing all of this.
Yeah. So what we have to remember is that this overdose epidemic is often put in the context of diseases of despair. Alcohol use, drug overdoses, and suicide are all at incredibly high levels in the United States, much higher than other countries. And we have to remember that there's social determinants of health, how people's lives, the quality of their lives, whether they have a roof over their head, education, the real basic things that we socialists fight for are really the root causes of this. So all the medicines in the world and pills are not going to solve this problem. But temporarily, we must offer syringes, we must offer naloxone, we must offer treatment for addiction, and we're very interested now in offering supervised injecting facilities like they have. There are over 100 in the world, none in the United States yet. Canada has a number of them, and Philadelphia is about to open the first supervised injecting facility. There's an incredible amount of work to do, and we encourage everyone to join us with this.
Great. And thank you so much for offering that summary of how this work fits into the greater picture of our overall socialist organizing, because it's important to keep in mind the connections between the work that we're all doing. We're not working separately. We may be working in different places, but we're all working together. Great. So this has been Revolutions Per Minute. I'm Amy Wilson. I'm here with
Jacob Clary
and Bruce Trigg.
And we've been talking about the New York City DSA medics and their coalition partners organizing for harm reduction under capitalism. Thanks so much, Bruce and Jacob, for speaking with me today. And we certainly hope to have you back on the show and keep talking about this important organizing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. And be healthy, everyone.
Thank you. You as well.
Well, thank you very much to Amy Wilson for that great interview with Jacob Clary and Dr. Bruce Trigg of the NYC DSA Medics. You're tuned in to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City, broadcasting at 99.5 FM. So we only have a couple minutes left in the show, so we may have time for one or two very, very brief calls. So we'd love to hear from you. Please call in at 212-209-2877. Again, that's 212-209-2877. We've got about 3 minutes left, so if you want to share how you're coping with the quarantine, how maybe you've lost your job in the past couple weeks, or you're in a workplace and you feel unsafe and you want to get organizing. If you want to share that perspective with us, hop on and call 212-209-2877.
We have a call.
Please. Oh, we've got a caller. Hey, you are live on Revolutions Per Minute on WBAI. What's your name and what's your question or comment?
Hi, I'm Zabby, and thank you so much for your show. And I do appreciate what the gentleman was speaking about, how the despair leads to all of these, and people don't understand the social causes of these things. So I'm so glad that you pointed these out and in this interview. And also, I wanted to point out now you're speaking up for concerns for the working people who are workers. I am speaking up now for people who worked all their lives. I don't hear anyone speaking up for retired workers who are not getting any part of any check. That's a mythology now at this point anyway. And so senior citizens are not getting any representation that I hear from anyone, from the presidential candidates, from in fact, what do they want to do? They want to privatize Social Security and make it a capitalist mechanism.
Well, thank you very much for that comment, Zabby. We really, really appreciate it. And I think it is really crucial always, but particularly at this time, to center the concerns of our elderly, that their Social Security has been diminished, and we absolutely need to fight to expand that, to expand what Medicare covers, that within this crisis where older people are at a more dangerous threat to the virus, we should be standing in solidarity with people regardless of their age and fighting for a better world. So I just want to thank all our guests. I want to thank Halsey, Jonathan. I want to thank Dr. Bruce Trigg and Jacob Clare. I want to thank Amy for doing that interview. I want to thank all our listeners for tuning in. You've been listening to Revolutions Per Minute on WBAI, and we'll be back at you next week. Solidarity to everyone who is dealing with both this virus and economic crisis, and solidarity with the workers at BAI and everywhere else who are keeping our society pumping while we're facing this threat. Thank you. This is Jack Devine, and you'll hear from Revolutions Per Minute next week, Tuesday at 5 p.m.